Um, our third professor, actually, if you're still following in the organization sheet, is on the 4th page. Actually, Dean Bob Bangler-Grounds comes from educational theory and practice. You'll see his name there, but a little bit further down, you'll see Alandeom Oliveira's name. Alan does so many things, but is involved in science education research. That's how we know him in CASDA. We partnered with him. He'll be looking for research sites and getting connected with the field. That's part of our mission. And so what we're supposed to do in return, wonderful things have happened under Alan's leadership. With the Common Core, I don't know if this is true in Pennsylvania, but the curriculum in some ways has been reduced really by, what they say, well, if something's tested, it matters, right? Otherwise, it doesn't seem to matter too much, right? So science matters tremendously, and there's a coming of the new generation science standards, and Alan is doing so much to work in that area. Alan, thanks so much for taking time with us, sir. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
It's great to be here, just want to say that a big part of my productivity, I think, here at the university has been because of leadership. We're talking about leadership in schools, and I have to say that without my partners, I was able to create here. Also with the help of CASA has been a great source of force for those partnerships to happen. So without CASA and without all the support from the leaders, I think my work would not have been done to the extent that I was able to accomplish, all the things I was able to accomplish. So having said that, indeed, my focus is science education. So I'm originally from Brazil. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I taught there physics, chemistry for a while. Then I taught in Missouri for a little while as well, physics. And in the meantime, I became more interested in the research side of education. So my work, like the two previous presentations, it's more focused at the really what I call the nano level of education. Really in practice, teacher-student interaction, and even things like word choices, very minute details of teaching and learning. So that's really the lenses that I use to approach my work. So we're kind of shifting to that focus right now. The focus has been primarily on this relationship between language and thoughts. I think partially due to my own background as someone that has to learn new languages as part of my job. I became fascinated by the notion of language and thinking, and what's the relationship between the two? Does you have to learn to speak before you can think in a certain language, or vice versa, or how does that happen? So that's been a major area of my work here. So just to give you a sense, as far as a larger theme of my work, I've been looking at pedagogy, primarily linguistic aspects, ways of talking, ways that teachers do questioning, for instance, in the classroom. It's an interest of mine. Very minute details of language use in the classroom. Also, small groups working together, how they negotiate knowledge, how they construct knowledge, how they negotiate power at different grade levels. So that's really the primary area of my work. Argumentation is becoming very popular right now, scientific argumentation, how you promote that with students. So I've also been doing some research on that area. A lot of my work has been coming at the elementary level, but I've moved up to high school. And actually, the work I'm going to share with you here today is one great example of that happening. It's my work at the secondary level, actually. So this is the project I wanted to talk to you about. This is also part of a grant. It's called MOP, Multimodal Observation Protocol. And here the idea, this is a project that was funded by the US Department of Education as well, the Office of English Language Acquisition. And the idea behind this project was, initially, it came from our own personal experiences here in this country, which was the idea that, I don't know if you've ever been abroad, but typically if you're struggling to understand a conversation that's happening around you, you tend to look for clues, if you don't understand the verbal, you look for clues around signs, written signs, gestures, signs that can help you kind of have a sense of what's going on in the discussion. So we kind of embraced that experience a little bit here and came up with this question: how can we prepare teachers or help teachers kind of make sure that those schools are there for when we have students who are speakers of other languages coming to this country, they're trying to learn science and mathematics. If they need that support, those schools are going to be there around the room systematically and strategically placed around the room. So that was the idea behind this project. So it's a 5-year project, very large grant, and with great participation here from the local schools. Okay. This is kind of the overview of the project, and it's a professional development project, okay? Several things I think make it different from other professional development efforts that were discussed here today. The way we approach the professional development is very specific. First of all, we, myself and my colleagues, really embrace that notion that we're going to treat teachers as experts with a lot of practical expertise, and that's something that we wanted to have. So we don't go out and try to impose our way of teaching a particular model, a pre-established model to them. So that's not what we wanted. We wanted to kind of work with the teachers as experts and collaborate with them and let it emerge a little bit more naturally within their own context, what works. So that was the idea. So we would work with them in terms of sharing the models that we have, sharing the research, and they would kind of share with us their own experiences in their own context, and we would come up with an effective way of addressing the needs of the student populations they have in their own schools. Okay, so the assumption being, every school is different. When you start talking about immigrants and the needs of language ELs in the classroom, in the science and mathematics classroom, it varies by culture. We have classrooms with dozens of different languages at the same time, so each classroom is very unique in that regard. The needs vary a lot. There's a lot of overlap with special ed students who are speakers of other languages but also have special needs. So there's a lot of variation. Each context has really different needs. So the way we approach this professional development was to establish teams in each school. So each year we work with different schools. And in each school, we have teams of science teacher, a math teacher, and a language specialist. And we also kind of bring in pre-service teachers so they can have the experience as well. So we work with them throughout the school year, first assessing the situation, what they have, what they do not have, areas that need improvement. And they collect data from their own students to kind of guide their decisions afterwards. So it's also data-driven kind of approach, but the teachers themselves collect the data, and we are part of the process of identifying areas that they need to target in their own schools. Okay? With the emphasis placed on the multimodality, the idea that learning, it's not limited to the verbal. It's also, there's a visual, there's a gestural component, there's many other components that the teacher has as a resource that can be systematically used to support the learning of students, that student population. So the mission here was to work with teachers, to identify the strategies that would help them, given their situation, and also to evaluate the impact of their interventions in their students. Did that help or not? There's also a focus on mentoring going on in the classroom, and also a big part of this was to promote conversation and dialogue within the school itself. Our experiences here have been that the language specialists usually doesn't have that much time to even talk to the science and the mathematics teacher, So there's not that much conversation going on within the school that we saw. And we wanted to foster that, to create the time for them to actually have that conversation and understand. Surprisingly enough, even within the two communities, there's differences of jargon. It's even hard to talk at sometimes because the specialized jargons that we have within the different areas of education. In science, we have the 5E. In language, there's the realia, and it's hard to have a conversation. There's not much of a common ground within the different communities in education. So we wanted to kind of address that issue and create a common language and be able to talk to each other and work together. Speaking of leadership, in the first year of this project, we did have a problem with leadership being resistant to us, especially because of issues. There's a lot of defensiveness in terms of there was concern, I felt like, that we would put them in the bad light, in terms of showing, poor performance of ELs in their schools, or criticizing the schools. So we had to establish that trust relationship with the schools first before now that's no longer a problem. We actually have too many schools trying to collaborate with us now that they know us better. But initially there was a lot of resistance. Even one of the schools that was originally signed up for the grant when the proposal was submitted actually withdrew, and now the school is finally coming back 3 years later to be part of the project. Because of the trust issues, a lot of fluctuation in terms of the staff at the schools also that created a problem for us. Part of that problem was that someone signed the grant as a letter of support for the grant, and then that person left the school, and that created a whole political issue for us. So there is that the political side is important, and it could prevent things from happening here. Okay. Part of this program, what we do here in training the teachers, we have summer institutes, and we also collaborate with the teachers in the schools throughout the school year. We give them support, we give them, present strategies that they can learn, they can apply to their schools right away. Something that we tend to emphasize here, this idea that there are different strategies and different models, different ways of addressing the problem of language in the content area. I don't know how familiar you are with what's going on in science education, language education right now, but there's this assumption a lot of times that whenever you place an EL, a person learning language, in a hands-on science environment or mathematics environment, magically they learn language. And we wanted to kind of take the magic, or get rid of that word magic there, and say, there needs to be support, there needs to be a structure for them to learn. Okay, it doesn't, immersion without any planning or structure actually overwhelms the English learner. So we wanted to address that. Typically, when you're trying to talk about how to teach context to an English learner, the SIOP model, just to add to your bag of acronyms, it's the classic. Okay, so the idea here is to what they call upfronting language. You begin with the language that's needed for the inquiry lesson, okay? That's a source of contention with science education, because in science education and mathematics education, a lot of times you do investigation, so you don't begin by giving them the answer, the words that they need to arrive at. So there's some tension there. So we introduce them to models like this, and other ones, and say, well, these are the other things that the literature says works effectively to support the population. Would this work for your context? What would make sense given your context? This is another model that's newer, coming from Texas. It's called the 5R. The idea here, they do the opposite. They avoid presenting the words first and let it emerge more naturally throughout the experience. So don't begin with a list of words. You actually allow it to emerge in the conversation. And you actually use everyday language first before you introduce the scientific jargon also. So that's why you have the replacing everyday words with specialized words. That's more or less their approach. So what's nice about this model is it's kind of moving away from linearity. The SIOP model has this idea. There's a tendency there to dumb it down, in terms of a linear sequence of like a checklist of how to teach content to English learner that we wanted to get away from. So we wanted reflective use of a tool, and this model kind of helps us that way. Okay. So we start talking to teachers about language in general, and try to help teachers. Drawing on this is theoretical research from linguistics and communication in a way that's more accessible to teachers. So just to give you an example here, typically when you talk about communication in the classroom, like it's happening here also, there's a tendency for us to think of transmission in content, okay? So basically, when you take your first linguistics course, this is communication happening. You have a speaker, a hearer, and the speaker puts the encodes ideas into thoughts, into words, and transmits the idea to a receiver who then decodes the words back into ideas. That's typically how we tend to think of communication, okay, within the monolingual setting. So here, there's just two speakers of the same language. So just a message coming from one to the other, okay? Well, that works fine. Here, there's some assumptions being made here. Typically, the way that we tend to think of language in this way, this is the assumption that language is like a container for ideas, that we put things into words. So words are like boxes that we put thoughts magically go into words, and the box is received and woken up, and suddenly we understand the idea. So those are the assumptions. There's several assumptions being made here about that, okay? They're actually different metaphors. Other people talk about language and words as tools for constructing things. And that's a metaphor that we tend to like more, as opposed to just transmission from the expert to the receiver. To give an example here, when you have speakers of different languages, things get complicated very quickly. So this is now how the process works. If you have an English speaker with a translator talking to a Spanish here, so the message is encoded. It has to be recoded into a different code, a different language, and then received. See how it gets very complicated here? So as you may imagine, there's a lot lost in terms of ideas, because there's so many steps along the way. So what we want to do when we set out to work with teachers is to find a way to make this happen. We want to get rid of the middle person and bring the speaker who's a monolingual to learn English as they learn the content ideas. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. And the question of how, it's the one that we pose to teachers. So as part of the process, like I said, we present the models, the different metaphors for thinking about language, and then we start working with teachers in assessing what's your model? What do you think would work for in your classroom, with your students, with their needs? How would you approach that? So, so just to give you an idea what happened last year, these are just 3 different schools that we worked with last year. All local schools. I don't know if we have anyone here from those schools. It's Shan, Troy, and Colony, all nearby. Shan has a very large population of SIVE students, refugees, interrupted education. Troy is one where we had a very unique problem of students who spoke English but were not literate in their own first language. They spoke their first language, but they're not literate in it. So academic Spanish, for instance, they could not write in academic Spanish. So to ask them to translate from Spanish to English didn't always work because they didn't have that background in their own language. And Colony was one where there was this really diverse population of different students with different needs. Okay, so students with also with reading different levels of ability in terms of reading, speaking, and writing. Okay, so we had a team of teachers working in each school, and we worked with them throughout the school year, trying to develop their model. So embracing this idea of model here. And part of our approach here, we emphasize a lot of times teachers have this I think it's part of the survival mode that teachers have there's a tendency for us to expect simplistic solutions, and that's something we kind of established with teachers from the beginning. No, we're not here to give you magical solutions to teach this population, okay? But we're here to work with you and to give you the support and to give you the tools, as many as we can possibly get to begin to address the issue. So part of moving away from this is a magical, another strategy that I'm going to give you was to work with models. Okay, so we don't think of a particular strategy. Just using visuals, it's not enough. It's too simplistic. It's much more complicated than that. So using models as understanding the bigger structure in which your strategy fits. So that's how we try to work with that. So this is this is the school that was that had the refugee students, and we worked with the teachers throughout the year, and this is the model that they ended up creating with us, with our help. We wanted for them to have a bigger vision of how communication happened in their own classrooms. Okay, and this is what they came up with. through many rounds of revisions and going back and forth. Something that we notice here, I don't know if you can tell, if you can read this at all, this is a producer. And there's a teacher here initially. Then the language objectives, the SIOP model that we mentioned before, they learn it, they're already using here. Emphasize direct instruction. They had in their idea, in their mind, the students, because they're sipes, they have interrupted education, they have problems even doing homework and things like that. They need a lot of structure. That was their way of helping them, to give them structure, was through lectures, and that's how that's what they emphasize throughout that semester. Okay, so and then it gets to the students on the side here. Okay, so it's very transmissive. The students are still very placed in a very passive mode here. And as a feedback loop, we have this basically student work as their way of talking back. So students are talked to and they write back. Basically, that seems to be the way the communication happens there in your classrooms. Okay? Now, if you compare that to the different school here, what they came up with as a structure for their own classroom here, you start noticing very large differences. Okay, one difference that I think that comes up right away, it's the arrows are double-headed now, so there's a dialogue from student to student. So it's a different way of conceiving of how knowledge is being constructed in that classroom. Okay, and I don't know if you notice here, but up here you have all the different resources that they use, all the PowerPoints, everything, textbooks. See how they're not coming down, they're not converging, they're actually diverging. And that's something that we explore a lot with this teacher. What does that mean? It's diverging. It seems that their vision here, it's one where the students actually go to those resources, as opposed to those resources being used to give them the information. So it's a very different way of conceiving of communication in that particular school. So we took this as a very powerful model, this idea of exchange of ideas as opposed to transmission, and it's very transformative as well. Very empowering for ELs. And that's something else that we emphasize. It's the idea that ELs do have power, right? They're living beings. So we try to encourage teachers to move away from that notion that we're going to do it for them, do the learning for them, that our strategy is going to do the work for them. And actually, we say, you're working with them. They're smart people, and they can be part of the solution, right? They're not just the problem. So we kind of try to shift from that previous mode of thinking. And this kind of really reflects that really well. And the last team was the team, the Shantin team. And in here, is that the one? Yeah. This is a team where it became more text-centered. So what's interesting here now that they actually placed the dialogue. There was this direction of transmission here, but it's also almost like the students are talking to those things. There's talk between not student or student teacher, but with those, there's like a talk with the textbook, with the visual, with the PowerPoint. So that was another interesting idea. So it's also based on exchange, but mediated by texts. Okay. So what we did was to work with the teachers in creating those models and incorporating strategies that would address certain parts of the model, okay, throughout the school year. And then in the summer, they actually came together with newer participants in our project, and they actually shared that. So there's this sharing of teacher-to-teacher sharing going on as well, as opposed to us presenting our research to them. So in a way, we tried to place teachers as much as possible as collaborators, as opposed to just receivers of our professional development. So, and at the same time encouraging them to move away from that notion of placing ELs as receivers of instruction at the same time, by creating more multimodal supports, more visuals, more things like that. Very effective. We had many, a lot of data that we've been collecting, analyzing now, showing improved student performance. So it's been very effective, and we're still kind of going through the data. We have this huge mountain of data right now to analyze, but the initial data suggests that it was very successful. Okay. Conclusion: some of the take-home lessons that we took from this grant one of the things that we emphasize, because of the nature of the grant, it's more emergent. We don't have issues like you're talking about, Kevin. Fidelity is not an issue because it kind of emerges with the teachers, right? So they're not trying to match that previous model. They're creating their previous model. So fidelity is not really an issue anymore, I think, there for them. And they ended up doing what they created, implementing what they created. So some take-home lessons here is, first one is moving away from that notion of these isolated strategies. So let's just not think about solving all the problems of science education and mathematics education by implementing a Freire model or an isolated strategy, more text or more writing. Let's think about the bigger picture, the holistic picture of how to help them. Something else that we wanted our teachers to do, that we emphasize a lot, the idea of using strategies in a reflective manner. Don't wait for us to give you a checklist on how to deal with that population. Anything that we give you, we expect you to use it with reflection, okay? I'll always pose the question, how you make it better? Don't just accept it and follow the checklist mechanically. There needs to be reflection. So we emphasize that as well. And try to help them understand a little bit more the idea of language. Contents teachers have a hard time seeing language. For them, language is transparent because they tend to see ideas. That's their training. That's the training they have. They see conceptions, misconceptions, right? But the language of how those conceptions is communicated, negotiated, seems to be transparent to them. And that's something we try to emphasize, that they need to be aware. Language is there. There's a lot of resistance from teachers in terms of saying, well, I'm not a language teacher, I'm a content teacher, I'm a math teacher, I'm a science teacher. So we have that kind of resistance as well. And likewise, for the language educators, we always have problems with language educators that are not always open to, especially mathematics. Mathematics is a problem. To encourage the language educator to work with a mathematics teacher was a big problem, because there was no trust, and the content area seemed so different. And so we had to really step in and kind of help the dialogue happen. So that's basically what I have. So it's one of my major project that I'm working on right now. Very passionate about it. I'm very passionate about my teachers, and been having a lot of fun with it, actually. So.
Well, thank you, Alan. This is great.